G'day Eagles fans, welcome back to True Eagle. Today I'm going to do my final preview video ahead of the 2025 AFL Draft. The next time you see me, I'll be doing a reaction video as soon as the draft ends, and we could have 4 new Eagles by the end of night 1, and then just have one last pick on night 2 to match a bid for potentially Charlie Banfield or Kobe Evans or something like that. So in today's video, I was just going to touch base with you about what I'm thinking and feeling ahead of this draft, and sort of loosely what I'm expecting, although I don't know how much has changed in terms of the latter, in terms of what I'm expecting ahead of the draft, because I feel like there has been radio silence about what the Eagles are going to do this year, which I kind of like. I like the intrigue of that. But naturally, Cal Toomey's Phantom Draft came out a few hours ago, and I get the strong impression from Toomey, both in the mock that he released, but also just listening to him talk over the last few weeks, that he's more guessing what West Coast is going to do rather than having some solid intel. You know, it's a factor that, you know, we're in the West, and therefore Toomey may not have the connections like he does at other clubs. It's also true that the recruiting team has seen a shake-up over the last few years. Maybe he doesn't have connections there. In any case, I just think he might be guessing a little bit as to what we're likely to do. But in today's video, we'll just map out what it looks like if we go with 1, 2, and 13. We'll talk a little bit about trades. That never seems to go down well when I release a video speculating about trades. But nonetheless, we'll consider it as a possibility, even if Toomey thinks it's unlikely we move pick 2, for instance. So we'll start at the top, and we have picks 1 and 2 as it currently stands. Pick 1 is almost certainly going to be Willem Dersma. There has been no suggestion we're going to move that pick, albeit that's also kind of true of pick 2 as well. I just really don't think it's likely. And if we move a pick at all, I think it's far more likely to be pick 2, if anything at all, right? So we know Willem Dersma, we can bank on that. So obviously the question looms, as it has for weeks now, who do the Eagles take at pick 2? It seems to be that the general consensus and the expectations will take Cooper Duff-Tytler, and I personally have moved to that view over the last few weeks, even if previously I'd made a balanced argument against the idea that we should draft a forward ruck. But I also, as a fan, even though I do put a bit of time into preparing for the draft and trying to make content in this space, I will defer to the club's judgment on this particular issue. And I certainly, as an Eagles fan and also the host of an Eagles fan channel, I certainly don't want to be seen complaining about draft picks. I mean, we're talking about these 18-year-olds entering the league. I'm just going to be giving my opinion on what I think we should do naturally. But nonetheless, on Cooper Duff-Tytler, again, I'll defer to the judgment of our recruiters, who have drafted solidly over the last 4 years, I would say. I'd say it's been rock solid without being outstanding, and it certainly hasn't been poor. So if they really think Cooper Duff-Tytler is too good to pass up at pick 2, even if I think there's downsides to going for a project haul when there's some other midfielders available who more clearly improve deficiencies of ours, if they think he's too good to pass up, I'll support that. So I'm going to sort of loosely be expecting it's Cooper Duff-Tytler at pick 2, assuming we don't trade the pick. The only other 2 contenders, in my opinion, would be Dyson Sharp, who Toomey actually had slipping to Essendon's pick as well, which becomes pick 10, because he has us bidding on Harry Dean as well, which I'm so suspicious of. Like, I assumed that the Harry Dean bid conjecture was around us maybe posturing to try and motivate Carlton to move their picks. As it happens, it's been reported that Carlton's likely to move that pick 9 to Essendon. I think we can consider that just about locked in. But as far as bidding on Harry Dean at pick 3, that's a very curious one. Out of all the other academy players, I would have bid on Dylan Patterson first, or Dan Annable first, and Toomey obviously has us bidding on Zeke. So I don't think there's any possibility Harry Dean ends up at West Coast. I just think it's a curious move, and a little bit antagonistic as well to bid on Carlton's father's son when he is so clearly not ranked in that top 5. But fair enough, whatever. It's likely to not mean anything. I guess the takeaway there is Richmond's unlikely to take Dyson Sharp, but according to Toomey and the broader rumour mill at the moment is that Richmond are probably going to be taking Sam Cummings. So I think it'll be Dersma and Cooper Duff-Tytler. Is there a possibility Essendon and West Coast could get a deal done for pick 2? I think it is still possible, purely based on the fact that there has been so little info coming out of West Coast this draft period that even if Toomey doesn't expect a trade to happen, I wouldn't say that's absolutely locked in. And West Coast and Essendon probably could have made discreet conversations around pick 2. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but obviously there's a West Coast connection there with Essendon. They've got Rosa, they've got Craig Vozzo, they've got Rowan O'Brien. So I suppose it's still distinctly possible. And to be honest, I think it would be a good outcome for us if we were to say move 2 and 13 for 5 and 6 in this year's draft. that would give us a Dyson Sharp or, say, a Farrow or a Doveston. And a Farrow and a Doveston would unlikely be there at 13, which is going to pull... Well, I think Toomey's mock had our second or third pick at pick 19 after all the bids. So I would have loved like an ideal scenario if we drafted Dyson Sharp and Sam Cumming in the first 6 picks of the draft. But I think if we hold pick 2, we're unlikely to go any other way than Cooper Duff Tytler. So I will say, if I'm Essendon, I probably prefer holding picks 5, 6, and 9 in the draft and just taking them to the draft rather than trade up to get pick 2. It is possible they're also after Sullivan Roby and not Cooper Duff Tytler, but I would certainly be amenable to it as a West Coast fan if we did trade 2 down to 5 and 6 and gave up 13 as well for all the reasons I just mentioned, and getting a couple of midfielders there would be ideal. So in Toomey's mock as well, he had us bidding on Jai Murray from the Gold Coast Academy and then doubling down on Gold Coast Academy players and taking Bo Adenshaw. Which, this one's an interesting one. I'd actually read, it was in a media outlet, I can't remember exactly where I read it. It could have been Fox, could have been The Age, that did suggest West Coast had done their work on Bo Adenshaw. For me, tough one, because I think on talent, it's a little bit of a reach. But at the same time, I have been advocating for maybe drafting Dyson Sharp at 2, which is a reach compared to Cooper Duff Tytler, if you believe all the general consensus about those rankings. So I have to be consistent there. So it is a little bit of a reach. On the other hand, it is a genuine midfielder. And I think if we do take CDT at pick 2, then it maybe does make us more likely to reach for a midfielder at pick 19 or pick 13, we'll call it for the time being, because that's what it is prior to the bids. I do understand the logic that we're more likely to reach for a midfielder in a genuine position of need. It does make me a little uncomfortable, though. While I think Adenshaw fits us from a position and attribute point of view, I think there's a lower ceiling on what Bo Adenshaw could be in comparison to guys like Josh Lindsay, who is going at pick 20, which I think is the very next pick after us. Noah Hibbins-Hargreaves, who I think is a little bit boom or bust, and that's why Toomey didn't have him in the top 30. Latrell Pickett, unavailable in Toomey's mock, but a small forward that, again, like I've advocated for going for Lockie Doveston. I don't think he'll be available if we hold our picks where they are. So a Latrell Pickett as well, from a position point of view and a talent point of view, I actually think that would be exciting. That being said, there's arguments against him because he's been a bit of a bolter and doesn't have the body of work on him. So there are arguments against that as well. Harley Barker, probably from a talent point of view, far exceeds some of even the guys I've just mentioned there. But he has the ACL that he's recovering from, so there is a little bit of a downside to picking him up. There's Jevon Philippou, who again Sumi didn't have in the top 30, which surprised me. I wouldn't say that doesn't mean Philippou's any good or anything like that. I think it's probably just a product of a very even draft pool. I have grown to like Cameron Nairn. In this mock draft, he has Melbourne going early on Cam Nairn at pick 12. But I do think he projects as a player that West Coast would like, and I think the idea with Cam Nairn is probably to be more of a running wingman than purely like a third tall forward. So I was actually kind of starting to like him for that pick before the Melbourne connection became a thing. And then that's also true of Mitch Marsh. So while none of these guys are midfielders as such, some of them have midfield potential. What Bo would bring, hypothetically, and I don't want to get too fixated on Bo Adenshaw in this video, but we'll talk about him because he's a link that I hadn't really discussed on this channel. But he is a midfielder, admittedly not a big-bodied midfielder, 182 centimetres and somewhat slight, albeit not tiny, but he does have really good stoppage craft. If you watch the way he gathers the ball cleanly for a start and he finds his teammates really well, and his overhead handballing was really impressive. It reminded me a little bit of Murphy Reid in that sense. He's very good at that. He doesn't have the weapons of a Murphy Reid, and they're not really the same player at all. But the same like IQ around the stoppages is really strong. So that is absolutely something we need. Someone who can win clearances consistently. He's not a high meters gained player, but he is tidy. So we do need midfielders that can get from contest to contest. If he can run all day, and his 2km time travel I think was about 6:15. So I think getting to stoppages is not a problem. Getting the ball out, supporting Harley and Elijah, I think there's a fit there. And I wouldn't be totally against it. But it does seem a little bit early because I would have thought Bo Adenshaw probably doesn't go in the top 30 of this year's draft. But nonetheless, like the connection has been made to Adenshaw not just from Toomey, but I do think he may have had a bit of a shot in the dark there. So if anyone's wondering, in the scenario that Toomey mapped out as well, Gold Coast couldn't match Bo Adenshaw presumably because they just matched another bid on Jai Murray. So I think for them, there will be Gold Coast Academy talents that are available. And I also think from a go-home point of view, you're probably safe picking Gold Coast players that are not rated right at the point end of the draft in this scenario here because Bo Adensall requesting a trade home to the Gold Coast Suns or the Brisbane Lions is likely to see a lot of competition for that spot. So from that point of view, I actually think that's a safe bet. But yeah, as I said, this was a bit of a shot in the dark from Toomey. When you consider last year, Toomey's mock had us taking Murphy Reid, interestingly enough. As we know in real time, Bo Allen was tipped to go a little bit earlier, and then we traded back, and we still didn't take Murphy Reid as well, which is an interesting thing to look back on. So I just think, we shouldn't get locked into what he predicts, but it is an interesting player to consider that does fit our needs, and I do think probably is someone I would take over an Ollie Greaves, who again didn't go in the top 30 of Toomey's mock draft. And I think for me to clarify exactly what that is, maybe with Greaves, it's probably just the concern about his ability to defend on transition, which I think is going to be important to McWalter. So I guess to clarify my thoughts on this space, if we just hold 1 and 2, then I'm fine with us taking Dersma and CDT. And then I'd probably be fine with the best available talent, whoever West Coast deems that to be. And if they go Adensall on the needs point of view, I can't argue against it when I've been crying out for a midfielder. And there just is an awkward lack of midfielders around this point of the draft. It depends on your views of Philippou. Do they see Philippou as a flight risk potentially? I don't know exactly what our thoughts are on that space. There could be reasons not to draft players like that. I actually think from an attribute point of view, like if Philippou was West Australian, for instance, I would probably be advocating quite strongly we take him at this pick. So I'm going into this draft open-minded, and I think this is the only way you can really be on draft night, because we won't know the answer to whether or not we did well for a number of years. I've definitely had days or drafts where I've watched this and I've thought, oh, that was a really good day. And it hasn't amounted to much. I think 2014 was an example of that. And there were also drafts where I thought we didn't do so good, and they ended up being really strong drafts for us. If you ask me my ideal scenario, I will be waiting on pick 2 to see if a trade comes through where we can land picks 5 and 6 and give up 2 and 13, because that gives us Dyson Sharp, who I think has Bo Adensall covered certainly in terms of his resume. There are similarities to the way they play, but Sharp definitely has the leadership and the clutchness and the presence that maybe a Bo Adensall does. And he's also much bigger and much more of a contested beast. So that would explain my preference there. If we took him at 5, and then at 6, I mean, if you wanted a Lockie Doveston or a Jacob Farrell, it seems you have to take him at 6 in this current state of affairs right now. Jacob Farrell will not last to 13, nor will Lockie Doveston, in my personal opinion, and I've thought that for quite a while now. I will hold out hope, obviously, that he slides, but I think Essendon now with a 3rd pick in front of us, or in front of that 3rd pick of ours, that is, and then North Melbourne also trading into the mix here, I do think it will be very tough to get Doveston. So if you go Dersma, Sharp, and then in an ideal world, a Sam Cumming as well, you could also consider Jacob Farrow, Doveston, maybe a Sully Rovey. I also do wonder, do we take Xavier Taylor if we have a 3rd pick in that top 6? Again, really not a need selection, but neither would Jacob Farrow, in my opinion. So you really just be picking the highest caliber talent that you can. And given in this scenario, we'd also have Dyson Sharp, I'd relax about taking Xavier Taylor, who I think could be a captain at AFL level. And I think he could be an all-Australian caliber defender. He's very versatile and has a lot of punch in his rebound for a guy who can also defend. So I'm very open-minded in summary, and I think that's the way to be. But I am curious as to your thoughts. Which way do you want to see this play out? I've sort of given up on the idea of some of these favourites like Farrow and Doveston lasting to that 3rd pick, but we are in an awkward position with not enough midfielders. Can I just say as well, there has been talk about us trading a 1st rounder into the future. I'd really only want that to happen if we somehow traded down and got another, like a 4th 1st rounder, rather than kick the can into the future and only take 1, 2, and a couple of NGAs and father-sons at the end of this draft. I really feel like we should be picking a 3rd time in this 1st round. I don't even know how it would be possible now to generate a 4th 1st rounder. I'm just speaking generally. Like, I don't want West Coast to trade for a future 1st unless it's someone like Melbourne or North offering a future 1st, which obviously would be reasonably valuable, I think, next year. That would probably pique my interest, but we'd probably also want something later, again, in this year's draft, so we have the picks to be able to match bids on a Tyler Williams or a Kobe Evans. So we'll talk quickly about those. I think you can segment this draft into, as it currently stands, our first 3 picks. There's 3 academy/father-son boys who I think could be drafted on the night, which doesn't seem to be shared by the media, but I'm just holding out the possibility because, wacky things happen with academy players late in drafts. So Tyler Williams seems to be considered a lock to go on the first nights, or at least be bid on. And as it currently stands, if that bid comes, I think Toomey had it at 24. We're going to have no trouble really matching that. So that's not a concern from that point of view. I suppose what happens then is if we have 4 players on the list, we only have 5 spots, which means that we could be in an awkward position on night 2 with 1 pick and 1 list spot if there's also a bid for Kobe Evans and Charlie Banfield. Obviously, one would be fine, but if a bid comes for both of those players, we have to make a decision. And those are 2 talents that I really want on our list as well, assuming we've gotten Tyler Williams, who I do think would be a great fit at West Coast. So I guess my hope is that, if it's Kobe Evans who could get bid on, the reason I think it's possible is because he was part of the academy squad at the start of the year, and I think was fairly decently rated, and I do think has as much potential as any of our other club-type players at the moment. But it only takes one club to think, geez, we only saw 4 games of Kobe this year. I think he had a number of injuries. I think he had 3, in fact. It only takes one club to like him and take him. Whereas right now, I feel like he's a bit of a hidden gem. And I think Banfield will be really good value. So that will be the thing I'm rooting for on night 2. We won't have live picks, I don't think, unless something changes. So it'll be a race to the end to hope that one or both of those players fall through to the rookie draft. But that's what I'm feeling, guys. Ultimately, open-minded, very excited to welcome these guys to the West Coast Eagles. There are some talented players. Like with this draft, we have a great hand here where we can really flesh out the young talent on our list. And while I do want midfielders, definitely, it's an exciting time nonetheless. As for the draft itself, I will be live on True Footy on night 2 of the draft. We won't be covering night 1. However, after night 1, given West Coast is so heavily featured, I'm going to do a reaction video on True Footy, and I'm going to do a reaction video on True Eagle as well. So you will hear from me after the draft. We'll be live on day 2 as well. And then after that, it's a little bit harder to foresee exactly what it's going to look like. I turned 32 on Saturday, so I might take a couple of days off. But for now, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Up the Eagles.